Two British scientists are finally revealing the DNA evidence they say helped solve one of history's biggest crime mysteries, the identity of Jack the Ripper.
The Jack the Ripper case is officially closed. That's not clickbait. It's a scientific fact. After 137 years, new DNA evidence has confirmed his identity. We're going to reveal the name, the science, and the story. But what nobody tells you is how this man, a known and violent individual, was allowed to roam free. The evidence doesn't just point to a suspect, it points to a man the police were watching. DNA from a shawl recovered at the scene of one of his crimes has incredibly found a 100% match. The truth isn't just who he was, it's why they let him get away with it. This changes the entire legend, science versus the phantom. The whole story, the final answer, comes down to a single object, a stained, tattered silk shawl. For over a century, the legend of Jack the Ripper was just that, a legend, a ghost story made of fog, gaslight, and shadows. He was the unsolvable phantom, the predator who baffled Scotland Yard and vanished into history. Hundreds of suspects, zero proof. Everyone was obsessed with the idea that he had to be someone special, a brilliant surgeon with a dark secret, a mad artist, even a member of the royal family. The Masons orchestrated the murder of the prostitutes who were blackmailing a member of the royal family, Prince Albert Edward Victor, who's Queen Victoria's grandson. But here's the catch. The evidence that finally unmasked him wasn't a complex conspiracy. It was a piece of fabric allegedly found at the scene of the Ripper's fourth victim, Catherine Eddowes, on September 30th, 1888. Eddowes on September 30th, 1888. This shawl was passed down through the family of a policeman who was at the scene. For decades, it was just a morbid curiosity. Most experts dismissed it as a fake, just one more piece of Ripper Tequa in a market flooded with them. So here's the deal. In 2007, an author and amateur sleuth named Russell Edwards bought it at an auction. He was convinced it was the real deal. He staked his money and his reputation on one final desperate gamble, to use technology the Victorian police could not even dream of. Edwards tracked down Dr. Jerry Lou Helen, a world-renowned expert in genetic analysis from old degraded samples at Liverpool John Moore University. This wasn't like a fresh TV crime show. This was a piece of silk that was over 125 years old at the time of the test. It was contaminated by countless hands, by time, and by the elements. Getting anything from it was considered a miracle. Dr. Luhalen and his team got to work in a sterile lab. They focused on the stains. Using advanced techniques, they carefully extracted the microscopic genetic material left behind. They were looking for something called mitochondrial DNA, or mtDNA. The mitochondrial DNA doesn't undergo the same recombination as occurs to the other 23 chromosomes. So your mitochondrial DNA was inherited intact from your mother, who got it from her mother, and so on. What most people don't realize is that mtDNA is a genetic time traveler. Unlike regular DNA, which is a mix from both parents, you only get mtDNA from your mother. She got it from her mother, and so on, passed down in an unbroken female line for thousands of years. It's tough.
It lasts a long time, and it's the perfect tool for cracking a historical case. The first test was simple. Was the shawl even real? The team tracked down a living descendant of Catherine Eddowes' sister. They took a sample and compared it to the DNA from the bloodstains on the shawl. It was a perfect match. The shawl was real. It had been at the scene, soaked in the victim's blood. That alone was a massive discovery. But then they found something else. Mixed in with the victim's DNA were other trace samples, specifically samples consistent with semen. This was it. This was the perpetrator's genetic signature left behind in his moment of horrific rage. Now came the final step. Edwards and the team had a prime suspect, a man whose name was already whispered in the original police files. They tracked down a living female line descendant of that suspect's sister. They got a sample, they ran the test. Again, it was a match. After 137 years, the science pointed with 100% certainty to one man. And it's not who you think. It wasn't a prince, it wasn't a doctor, it wasn't a famous artist. His name was Aaron Kosminski. So, what does it mean to you for him to be officially and formally named?
Closure for the family, which is really important. But really the end of, for me, 25 years of a very long story.
But Kosminski wasn't some new discovery. He was the man police suspected all along, the asylum secret. The name Aaron Kosminski means nothing to most people. It's not a name that sells books or inspires blockbuster movies, and that's exactly the point. The wow factor here isn't that the Ripper was a glamorous celebrity. The wow factor is that he was a 23-year-old Polish immigrant who worked as a hairdresser in the very heart of Whitechapel. He wasn't a phantom, he was a local, and the police knew exactly who he was. Kosminski had fled Poland, then part of the Russian Empire, to escape the brutal pogroms and had arrived in London with his family, settling in the East End. By all accounts, he was a deeply troubled man. He was known to be mentally unwell, suffering from what modern experts believe was paranoid schizophrenia. He was plagued by dark visions, auditory hallucinations, and a profound, violent hatred of women. This isn't just speculation. This is what the police at the time believed. While the public and the newspapers were going insane over the Dear Boss letters and theories about mad doctors, the top cops on the case were quietly building their own shortlist, and Kosminski's name was at the very top. Chief Constable Melville McNaughton wrote a famous internal memo in 1894 that named Kosminski as a primary suspect. He described him as a man who had a strong homicidal tendency and was averse to women. But here's the catch. The most chilling evidence, the real bombshell, comes from Chief Inspector Donald Swanson. Swanson was the man who oversaw the entire Ripper investigation. He was on the ground every single day. Years later, after he retired, he got a copy of his boss's memoirs. In the margin of the book, right next to the section about the Ripper case, Swanson scribbled a private note. He wrote that the perpetrator was Kosminski, the man who was sent to an asylum and perished there. This is history-changing. The officer in charge of the case privately confirmed the man's identity. And get this, Kosminski lived right in the middle of the slaying locations. He was known to be violent. And then, in 1891, his family finally had him committed to an asylum where he stayed for the rest of his life. And when did the Jack the Ripper slaying stop? Exactly when Aaron Kosminski was taken off the streets. The DNA, the timeline, and the secret police testimony all point to one terrified and violent man. He was the monster. But to understand the monster, you have to understand the nightmare world that made him. How London built a monster. To understand the terror, you have to understand the world that hit him. The London of 1888 was not the charming city of top hats and carriages you see in movies, and that's putting it lightly. It was a tale of two cities. While the rich lived in grand houses in the West, the East End, especially Whitechapel, was a living nightmare. It was one of the most crowded, diseased, and desperate places on earth. Whitechapel was an area where you had a lot of homeless, drifters. You had what were known as the common lodging houses. Over 900,000 people were crammed into a few square miles, a tangled mess of narrow, unlit streets, dark alleys, and hidden courtyards. We're talking about population densities of over 1,000 people per acre. The air itself was toxic, a thick yellow pea superfog, a mix of river mist and black coal smoke from thousands of chimneys choked the city. This fog was so dense you sometimes couldn't see your own hand in front of your face. It was the perfect cover for a predator. There was no safety net. Poverty wasn't just an inconvenience, was a potential death sentence. The heart of this world was the lodging house, or doss house. These were filthy, horrible places where you could rent a bed or even just a spot on the floor for a few pennies a night. Some offered a 4-penny coffin, which was literally a coffin-shaped box to sleep in. Others just had a rope strung across the room for men to lean on as they slept standing up. For the women who became the Ripper's victims, life was a constant daily struggle to find those DOS pennies. They would do anything for the price of a bed just to avoid sleeping in a dark alley. This is what made them so vulnerable. They were not glamorous. They were middle-aged, poor, and desperate women. Marianne Nichols, Annie Chapman, Elizabeth Stride, Catherine Eddowes, and Mary Jane Kelly. They were trying to survive one more day. They had to walk the streets late at night in the fog and the dark, looking for any way to earn the price of their bed. What most people don't realize is that this environment didn't just hide the monster, it helped him. The police were completely overwhelmed. They had no radios, no forensic science, no fingerprinting. Their main tools were a whistle and a wooden stick. In the maze of Whitechapel, a man could commit a terrible act and vanish into the fog and the crowds in less than a minute. The predator didn't need to be a genius. He just needed to be local. He needed to know the alleys, the shadows, and the escape routes, and he needed to know who to pick. The women, so desperate they would trust a stranger for a moment, and so poor that no one would notice they were gone until it was far too late. The streets were a trap, and the police, for all their efforts, were about to be sent on a wild goose chase by the media. When a criminal became a legend with the city screaming for answers, the London Metropolitan Police launched one of the biggest manhunts in history. They flooded Whitechapel with officers. They interviewed over 2,000 people. They detained and questioned at least 80 men. They followed every single lead. So why did they fail? Yeah, about that. They weren't just fighting a man. They were fighting the time they lived in, and they were fighting a media circus that they helped create. First, there was no such thing as forensic science. The concept of a crime scene was brand new. When a victim was found, crowds would rush in, reporters would trample over evidence. The scene would be contaminated in minutes. Police had no fingerprinting. They had no blood typing. All they had were witness reports from people in dark, foggy streets. Some said he looked shabby. Others said he looked respectable. It was useless. What's truly wild is that they did find clues but didn't know what to do with them. Near the scene of Catherine Eddowes, the same victim from the Shaw, they found a piece of her bloody apron. On the wall above it, someone had written in chalk, "The Jews are the men that will not be blamed for nothing." Was it a clue from the perpetrator? Was Kosminski, who was Jewish, trying to frame his own people? Or was it just anti-Semitic graffiti? We will never know. The police commissioner, Sir Charles Warren, worried it would start anti-Semitic riots, so he ordered it erased immediately. They washed away one of the only pieces of physical evidence they ever found. Consequently, that's why police were made to erase the graffiti, to take away any suspicion from the Masons. Then came the letters. The Predator became a global celebrity when the infamous Dear Boss letter arrived at a London news agency. It taunted the police and promised more to come. And it was signed with the chilling name that would echo in history: Jack the Ripper. The problem? Everyone's obsessed with this, but almost all experts now agree it was a fake, probably written by a journalist at the Star newspaper to sell more papers. But it worked. It created a media frenzy and sent the police on a wild goose chase, sorting through thousands of copycat letters. But here's the catch. One letter was real. The From Hell letter sent to the head of the Whitechapel Vigilance Committee arrived with a small box. Inside was half of a preserved human kidney. The letter claimed it was from one of the victims. And get this, Catherine Eddowes had her kidney removed by the Predator. While the public was obsessed with fake letters and wild theories about doctors and royals, the real Predator was walking among them. The case went cold. But now, 137 years later, the science has been challenged. The legend that won't perish. So that's it, right? Case closed. The DNA from the Shaw points to Aaron Kosminski, the police's #1 suspect whose institutionalization matches the exact end of the slangs. It's a perfect fit. Well, not so fast. This is where the story gets complicated and where you have to decide for yourself. The moment the DNA findings were published in the journal, Forensic Sciences in 2019, critics came out swinging. Their biggest argument? In one word: contamination. The Shaw is over 137 years old. It has been handled by police, by the original owner's family, by collectors, and by Russell Edwards' own team before it ever got to a sterile lab. How do we know the DNA found isn't just from one of them? So, what do you think? Is the DNA match the final word, or is the real Ripper still laughing at us from the shadows? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more mysteries. Amazing discoveries. Make sure to subscribe and hit the bell icon. Share this video with friends and join the discussion on what these findings could mean. Your thoughts and questions are important, so let's explore incredible mysteries together.